Well, hello there. If you're interested in learning more about building freestanding beam structures and other structures like that, then you've come to the right place. This video was always supposed to be only a tutorial for the windmill behind me, but I've scope crept the project a bit, to say the least. Well, if you want to learn some of the basics first, then you can just carry on watching. Now, when it comes to the basics of beams, there are some helpful tooltips here. You can start your beam with right click on any surface and then stop your beam again with right click. Or you can start your beam with right click and then cancel it with left click anywhere. Additionally, as you can see here, there's a higher quality mode, or a fine mode as I call it, which allows you to have a lot more precision when placing your beam, in contrast to the coarse mode. Now this behavior is selected when you place the beam down first. So I press shift, now it's fine. Pressing shift does nothing. And again, when I click without shift, now it's coarse. When I press shift, now it does nothing. So you can't have, for example, one end snapping to a 4x4 grid and the others were 16x16 grid. But the grids are a bit deceiving, because the tooltip says a 4x4 grid, but basically the beam snaps to the knots and edges of the beams, like here, here, and here, and here, for example. So it's more like a 5x5 grid. The same is true for the 16x16 grid. It's more like a 17x17 grid. Like imagine this thing, but scaled down to the size of one single block. I would only advise you use the fine mode when you deem it to be necessary because of the geometry you want to achieve or something else. Because most of the time the coarse mode just delivers enough precision, and when you want to make anything symmetrical, it's a lot easier with the coarse mode. Now when it comes to beams, their hitboxes deserve some special mention, because basically for this whole beam there's only one hitbox at its start, and it can only be broken there. For example, can't be broken here or here. Now actually selecting the hitbox of a beam can be quite inconsistent, to say the least, if you have a beam in hand. I can't see the hitbox, but switching to any other item is just fine. Now these hitboxes at the start of beams should be avoided when you try to place things in the general area. For example, now I can't place my beam flush with the wall because there's a hitbox in the way. Or when I want to start there, I can't because the hitbox is again in the way. Now the order in which beams disappear when you build them. Like for example, let's start at the same point and radiate outwards. Now when I break these blocks, except this one because it's next to that, you'll notice a quite weird behavior, basically where it deletes sometimes a bit randomly, but most of the time the oldest blocks, or the oldest beam, which as you can imagine is quite annoying when you've placed a lot of things down and misclick once, and then you have to delete some older stuff, which you then have to redo. Well, that's why placement direction is important. Now, to minimize the conflict between the ends of beams, I'd advise you to stick to a consistent direction in your builds, from which you will basically draw your beams in the direction of. For example, in the windmills it's from bottom to top, or you can choose any other direction you want. For example, when I drag this simple crosshatch pattern here, I'm always moving from left to right. I'm basically dragging the hitboxes of the beams behind me, so that where I actually want to place stuff, there are never hitboxes. Now, it can get a bit tricky when you, for example, want to place a hitbox here now, a beam I mean. Some things that can help with that are, for example, reducing the amount of beams in your structure. For example, you could have one large beam. Now there's one hitbox fewer, because you replace two beams with one. Another thing which can help is when you want to use, or you find yourself in the position of trying to connect a beam to the origin point of a bunch of other beams, then sometimes the precision mode can be quite helpful, because it basically allows you to wedge it in place somewhat. Like, this looks fine. Doesn't matter that it doesn't actually go to the bottom floor. Nobody sees that. Additionally, basically the block which you've actually placed these beams on is well important. When you want to place a beam here on this knot, basically notice how when I move from this block, I cannot select the edge where I actually want to place my beam, but when I come from this block, I can from these blocks. Sometimes you have to place additional blocks around here to maybe reach the middle. Now, when you want to place your beams away from the edges of full blocks, basically in between the blocks, it would be great if you could use chiseled blocks for this purpose. But basically, the problem is that the beam disappears with the chiseled block where you originated it from. Unless you want the chiseled block to be permanent, so you won't remove it after, I really wouldn't recommend chiseled blocks. In creative mode, it sort of becomes part of the block when you copy it. It's quite funny. So basically, in survival, you have to get creative. You can, well, when you press Control, you can place on vases or on peat or slabs, or you can, for example, place through blocks and then remove the blocks afterwards. Now, the hitboxes for these these middle beams can get quite disjointed, to say the least. For example, well, the hitbox should be somewhere. No, I started on there it is. Yeah, hitbox is just up here. Well, yeah, you just have to be mindful of that and not search endlessly for a hitbox that's somewhere up in the sky when you want to remove the beam. Now we come to the actual windmill part of this tutorial. Basically, the windmill will be constructed from these segments, which the steepness of the actual beams controls the height of, and the base controls the number of segments in your windmill. Well, the height I've characterized by basically going 1 to the right and a number of blocks up. I've used 8 as my steepness for this windmill, but I would recommend a 7 or greater to achieve the right look. The maximum length or steepness 2 in that case is 20, because that's how long the longest beam can be, although the stack goes up to 32. And the 7 or the 11 or 9, basically any odd number of base length, will determine how many segments there are. So basically in 7 there will be 1, 2, 3, and then the block will be the middle where you place your rotor on. When you want to calculate the final height based on your selected base and the selected steepness, you can just, for example, I take 7, then there will be 1, 2, 3 segments, excluding the middle, or just 7 divided by 2 minus 1. And when you now multiply that times your steepness, so 3 times 8, that's 24, and then you add 1, because you place the rotor on top, that will be your final height. So so this tower has a height of 25, which is important for the amount of power the windmill generates. Now, when it comes to the construction of the actual windmill, and at least in survival, you'll want to build a scaffolding like this, out of some easily placeable and sourceable material. Then you can just place your beams down there, run up with your active beam, and place it down at the top. As I've mentioned previously, sometimes you get issues with the hitbox, then you can build additional blocks and you can actually reach the center, especially when you want to go from here to the next stage. When you reach the last segment, you can place your wooden platform, and the cross beams should alternate, at least if you want to keep it traditional. You can also, of course, also do crosses. Once you're done with that, you'll want to move on to build the, well, sail or direction chooser, whatever it's called. You want to place it on basically a block of dirt and some slabs, so you can actually align the sail with the center of the shaft, which will run in the same direction. Now you can get as creative as you'd like with this top. I like to keep it simple. The reason why we step down from this gear to the large one is efficiency. I'd really recommend the video from BratWorst. I've put a link in the description. Basically explains everything relating to mechanical power. Now I'll have a slight time-lapse video of how I constructed this final windmill at the end of the video, in survival-esque. So if you just want to see that, you can skip ahead. Now we can come to some other constructions which you can use beams for. For example, this medieval footbridge. Of course, there are no actual rivers in vanilla VA, but you'll probably find a lot of other areas you can use it for. Now I do have to give my compliments to the VA devs. The shadows which the beams cast are really great, especially inside the footbridge, for example. Now, if you're more into some more modern bridges, this is an example of a suspension bridge with a simple bow. It has some more advanced construction materials, methods, whereas this was basically just placing the beams on a wall. In this one, we'll be also placing the beams on a wall, but a bit more complicated. I've doubled up this top beam to give it more substance. I would really recommend making the actual wall you place them on a lot more distinct, because you'll want to copy the design to the other side. So when you just copy the wall, it'll be a lot easier. I would also use the coarse setting, even if you may not be able to achieve that great of a roundness. Additionally, I have to give a shout out to these ropes. These are the medium strength ropes, but because they just fit perfectly into the other beams, it's very convincing. It's a very convincing look. Now these cross beams, I've just placed on blocks, additional blocks. Here, I've placed them on and some slabs. And these railings here, which basically meet up perfectly, I've achieved. As I've said, maybe you have to get creative. But basically I placed them on these acacia trees. As you can see. Then they're the perfect distance. Crazy bridge, where the bridge hangs from the rope at certain points and stands on the rope at others. Would be an eye catcher for sure. Or for example, what I did just recently, I simply copied this design, which is in here. You just have to look at the individual beams, decide on an order beams first, then these, then the cross beam, then this, and then these beams. And you just have to execute it here. Of course, you can also get a little bit more elaborate if you want to, for example, copy this one, this power line tower, which I've, well, just placed some windmills in. Of course, this took like 2 hours to build, with a base of 15, steepness of 9, and height of, I mean, the windmills are at a height of 54. The maximum efficiency for windmills was like 150, I think, 40, I think, 140. BratWorst video goes into a lot more detail than that. But yeah, that's like a taste of what you can achieve with only beams. Now, none of these things are somehow groundbreaking or something other than like that. So it all has been done before, but I've hoped you learned something new, and I've been able to, well, distill all these things into a somewhat concise video. Take care.